Good afternoon again. I hope you are awake now after the coffee break. And so Gila asked me to talk about risk factor for transport-related health and behavioral problem in horses. And I spent the last 12 years working on the effect of transport on health and welfare. So I'm sorry for the self-citation, but it's basically like, it's really hard for me because that is really my research area. And this is why it's also hard for me to summarize 12 years in 40 minutes, but I'll do my best also to keep you awake. So when we speak about equine transport, we really have to go back in the history. And we have to consider that the first trailer was actually, in the first picture, was actually a box taken from other horses, basically, And then clearly we had the sheep, the first horses shipped by sheep, and then clearly there were problems by loading and unloading. Then we had the period of the train, and I have to say that clearly this was the past. And now the majority of the transport is on on the road, we say on the road, or by plane, by air. But why horse travel so much? We had the number before of the FEI, and clearly, if we just take the horses which compete, they really travel a lot, and there are many horses traveling every day. And if we take also in consideration not only the competition, but the sales and also the moving, when we move, our horses tend to move with us. So really, we are talking about many horses travel every day around the world. And anyway, we have to consider the transport is a physical and mental stressor for our animals, so for our horses. And each phase of transport may affect animal health, welfare, and behavior. So the first part of this presentation is trying to explain you what are the stressors during each phase of transport, because only if we really understand what are the stresses or what are the risk factors, we might learn how to minimize it and make the travel less problematic. And if you want to read more, this is a review which I've written and I'll suggest you. So this is my first question for you. What are the different phases of transport? So what I'm actually talking about. Loading. Transport itself. Unloading.
And if you're also preparing the whole thing.
So, really good. That's often our mistake. We think the transport starts with loading. It's not. There is a pre-transport, so all the preparation that you do. So the first phase of the transport is actually preloading, then comes the loading, then the transport in itself, the unloading, and then someone said the arrival. So there are actually 5 phases during a journey. And so basically, let's have a look what are the stressors. So during pre-transport, so what are the stressors, basically? Us. So it's the first moment where the human came into the picture. We arrive, we take the horse from the box or from the paddock. So there is basically the first human-animal interaction. That's clearly, if we have a good animal-human interaction, that will be a pleasant moment for the horses. But if our relationship is not so good, then clearly we are the first stressor. And then we come all the handling and the restraint procedure that we do pre-transport. We take the horse, we lead, we put protection and all this stuff. And for many horses, that means also to leave the body behind. So because they are the herd, and we know that now look, this morning they are social animals, they might really like some friends, and so they have to leave their friends and their home and the environment. So, and these are all the stressors. So managing well all these factors clearly minimize the stressor. So I have a good horse-human relationship, use appropriate handling, and avoid social distress will be minimized. Then come the loading. And I'm sure we are here like horse person, and I'm sure that we all face the problem of loading a horse or having a horse difficult to load. But why, basically, like, you know, horses are so fearful of loading? Just because it's actually like, you know, it's a fear of entering an enclosed space, the height of the step leading onto the ramp, the angle of the ramp, the instability of the ramp, and the darkness inside the trailer, and then the bad association with whatever has happened before during transport. So, and those are all stressors. This is why, like, you know, when I'm speaking about minimize stressor, then I'm just telling you, think about, like, you know, the lights inside the trailer, the ramp, how steep, how slippery is your ramp, and try to minimize those problems, because that is what is really fearful for your horse. In transit. So now, during transit, we have many, many stressors. So first of all, it could be isolation. Like if we have only one horse, if we move, like, you know, with a small float or trailer, and then basically, you know, these horses could be isolated and don't really like be isolated because they are herd animal. Or on the opposite, like opposite situation, overcrowding and also non-familiar neighbor. Like, you know, we also made our horses travel with stranger, and then, like, you know, they might don't like this situation also because they are confined and they, like, you know, they can even socialize with this stranger. And then the noise. Have you ever tried to be inside a trailer, inside a truck? The noise is terrible. Please stop using chain. They are really, really loud. So try to wrap your chain with something or use a different material, because it's really something which is disturbing for us. Can you even imagine for an animal which has the capacity over here, probably 100,000 better than us? So the noise is something which we really need to keep down during the journey. Then vibration, so motion stress. Like, you know, poor thing, their habit to pass around the grass doesn't move. So, but basically when they are in transit, they are basically on something which moves under their feet. And this is a scary thing for them. Like, you know, they have been not, I think, selected for this situation. So, and when I speak about vibration, please take into account that is something that all the vehicles should be checked and, like, you know, have, like, you know, good suspension to reduce the vibration. Positioning, like, you know, that's something which you know, we were saying yesterday night that there are no standard for horse trailer. So basically, everyone can build a trailer as you wish. And we built trailer thinking always from our perspective. So we like travel facing forwards, and it's much easier for us to load the horse and go outside, and then, like, you know. And this is what we ended up with, the majority of the trailer facing forwards. But if you look at the literature, actually, like, you know, horses prefer travel backwards or on the angle, like, sideways with the backward towards the direction of travel. And then driving skills. So, like, you know, again, in Europe, everyone can actually tow a trailer and go driving. There are no restrictions. It's just a normal license. instead, like, driving with living animal should be regulated a bit more. So people should actually take courses to understand how to drive. If you think that for driving buses, like they have a special driving license, that would be probably the same. And this should something that should be enforced. And clearly, when we speak about vibration and driving skills, come also the type of road. So clearly, going a minor road, cornering, up and down the hills, it's clearly something that increases the vibration inside the trailer. So when you plan your journey, try to think about all of these. So drive slowly, corner, like, avoid braking, hard braking, and pick the nicest road that you can. It doesn't matter maybe if you pay tolls, but maybe the road could be better. So, and then the environment inside the trailer. So I want to just point to this graph. So the red line is the temperature inside the trailer, and the blue line is the temperature outside the trailer. So the temperature inside the trailer is usually at least 5 degrees higher than outside. And that's normal because horses are living animals, they are moving, so they generated heat. So try to think about, because often we think, poor thing, he's cold, put a rag on horses. But instead, what we face in transport is not cold stress, but heat stress. And actually now with the EFSA, we are trying to propose, like, some how to regulate transport in heat. And even the FEI, like, regulate and say the horses should not be transported if the temperature outside is above 27 degrees. But like the 27 plus 5 is 32. So I'm actually pushing to suggest the new regulation with temperature inside the vehicle. And since we know that basically the thermoneutral zone is between 5 and 25 degrees, then what we are suggesting as a EFSA is actually try to regulate and let basically horse be moved even in summer, but at the condition that the temperature inside the vehicle is no more than 25 degrees. And that will basically, I think, be accepted by the transport company because there is the need to move horses in summer if you want to compete. But if the EU regulate no movement with more than 27 degrees, then clearly could be a problem. So that is our suggestion by now. And clearly when we speak about thermal stress, and it's not enough to speak about temperature. We have to consider temperature, humidity, and also ventilation and the wind speed. So this is a graph taken from one of my research. So basically, we measure the wind speed inside a normal horse float with a passive ventilation. And so this is the wind speed. And you can see that at some point it's 0. Why is 0, in your opinion? Yes, the horse stopped. And it's just 30 minutes. Why just 30 minutes? Because drivers have to stop for 30 minutes. It's compulsory. It's a health or working regulation. But absolutely no wind in a passive ventilated truck. So again, like, I I'm pushing for a forced ventilation, so that, like, you know, if the driver has to stop, at least like they can activate the fence. But otherwise, even if you stop, remember to park in the shade and open the window, because really, otherwise they are going to be super, super hot because there is no ventilation at all in a trailer. Then comes to the fasting condition. So in transit, probably it's not your case because usually show jumping horses that travel with hay, but many other horses could actually fast during the journey, and they don't get feed, and often they even don't get water. So I suggest you, this is a guide, it's really nice, it's easy, it's plenty of picture, and actually it tells you how manage food and water in transit. Then clearly we have the other super risk factor, the journey duration, journey length. The EU regulation says that you can move your horses within 65 kilometers as you wish. It is not regulated. So one of my first research was actually try to understand if a 65-kilometer journey was stressful for horses, why should be not regulated? And basically when we compare a 1-hour journey, so almost 65 kilometers, with a 3-hour journey, basically both journeys were stressful for the horses. And actually, here I don't have the picture of the cortisol. The cortisol at the end of the journey was higher after the shorter journey than 3 hours. And that's normal because the first hour journey is the moment where they get more stressed and then they slow down. And again, if you want to read more about positioning and how backwards is better than facing forwards, this is another paper. And now I'm a bit obsessed by space allowance. And so one of my last research in Australia was actually compare the effect of different positioning at different space. I know there is the belief that horses need to travel really like in a narrow space so they don't fall. But I watched hours of videos, so you cannot imagine like, you know, how many videos and actually it's not, I'm sorry, it's a wrong belief. They actually need space. And in 1.5 bay, they can finally spread their leg and balance better because we all have studied physics. So if our body center goes in our skirt, we balance better. So please give more space to your horse when they have to travel. And then we have unloading. Unloading again, like, you know, we can have the same issues, or the angle of the ramp, slippery ramp, or no ramp at all. So please, like, you know, take into consideration that at the end of the journey, they are tired, so they might even more prone to sleep or falls if the ramp is not adequate. And particular attention for animal with lameness. Maybe you have a lame horses, so try to not to put too much weight on the lame leg. And then, yeah, we forgot. We think, okay, the journey has finished, yeah, no injury. But for the horses, going into a new environment is another stressor. So arrival is a phase of transport because there is a change of housing, feeding, water, and time zone. What I always suggest is that please bring some of your hay, even some of your water with you, and then, like, you know, avoid an abrupt change because it's something new, like, you know, it's a new environment. It's nice to find something familiar. Oh, it's my food. Like, you know, give them the opportunity to get adapted easily. And water, like, you know, I've been in the racing industry for a while, and we were moving horses from Rome to Taranto, and even after 6 hours journey, all the horses were refusing to drink the water in Taranto, maybe for the Ilva, maybe not, I had never discovered, but clearly their performance were terrible. So basically we solved the problem bringing all the water from Rome, and they actually were able to drink. So it's little thing can make a difference. And like when we are speaking about racing, you know, from the first to the third place is also lots of money. And we're speaking of less than 1 second probably. So little thing make the difference. So do animals suffer from jet lag? There are not much study done about it, but clearly, like, you know, we spoke about circadian rhythms this morning. So clearly, it's correct to assume that they suffer from jet lag. And actually, now I'm doing a study on air transport, and some of the transporter think that when they change hemisphere, so there is also huge variation between the environment temperature, they get more shipping fever. So now we are exploring and see if we can back up this hypothesis. So, but what welfare criteria does transport affect and why? All of them. So, like, you know, transport is a welfare issue. Today we spoke about freedom from thirst and hunger, thermal comfort, expression of social behavior. So yes, transport affects all of the criteria of welfare. This is why it's really important that we manage transportation well. And this is why, like, you know, I've been kind of spent the last 10, 12 years. And this is my main research question. Why, after transport, some horses develop a disease and some other no? And why some horses develop transport-related behavioral problem and others no? So this was, I think, my main research question. And well, what are transport-related behavioral problems? So I like to split the behavioral problem with the transport phases, so preloading, anxiety, loading, refuse to load, traveling, scrambling, powering, and then unloading, refuse to unload, freezing, jumping on the ramp, rushing out of the ramp. So what we did the questionnaire in Australia, and then we've done actually also in New Zealand and in Italy, asking the people if they had past experience with transport-related behavioral problem, and they were kind of common. 40% of the participants, we had more than 800 people replying, so it was a good study, robust study. They actually said yes, and then you can see that the majority of the problem are in loading and traveling. But surprisingly, there was no difference between professional and amateur, even if actually, like, you know, professional move more horses. So we can assume that amateurs have even more problem. And when we asked if they use it to train their horses for loading and traveling, 43% of the people said no. No training for loading, no training for traveling. And then we decide, okay, but let's have a look at the rest of the people who actually train their animal and see if there is an association between the type of training and the behavioral problem. And so, like, you know, we have these categories. So basically, no training or no identified training. The habituation, so like, you know, when you spend time to habituate your horse to loading and transport, much before the first journey, and Catherine has written this in the 1980s, how to habituate your horses for loading. And then self-loading, then probably you are familiar with, is a technique where the horse is load by himself with no restraint. It's you need to train before, usually with targeting training, when they can load on command. Or operant conditioning. And with the operant conditioning, we focus more on negative positive reinforcement or positive punishment. These were the type of answer. And basically, this was the distribution. So like, as I said, the majority of people had no training and 25% operant conditioning. So basically what we found that the risk of preloading behavioral problem was higher if people used whip, bum rope, and small float. And so they tended to use operant conditioning or no training at all. For the loading problem, basically, and that's not surprising, Katrin, the loading problem behavior decreases if horses were habituated to loading and traveling or actually self-loading. And clearly, like, I think that's a clear result. If the horses load by himself and learn how to load by himself, so clearly the likelihood of having problem behavior decreases a lot. And the vehicle, you can see, comes always back, because really, if the vehicle is larger, stable, then you have less problem behavior. And for the traveling, again, like, the same problem, more problem if the horses were training by operant conditioning, and actually even if they were racing horses. Our interpretation of this data is quite clear, because with operant conditioning, we tend to use more negative reinforcement. So like, you apply pressure and you release the pressure when they walk towards the trailer. But the problem is that, like, they are stronger than us. So what's happened, like, often we release the pressure when they go backwards. And this is why, like, we reinforce the wrong behavior of using negative reinforcement. And for the racing horses, our interpretation was that, like, we move horses always only to go to compete. So for them, there is a strong association, okay, like, another journey, another competition, and then maybe, like, lots of exercise, no time for rest. So, like, that was our interpretation. So even, I think, in the literature was suggested, like, to avoid the strong association of transport with something bad after the transport, and maybe move your horses sometime to go to a pasture, to go for a walk. That could be maybe let them less anxious inside the trailer. And again, like, even for unloading problem behavior, we got the same results. So horses trained by operant conditioning were more likely to develop unloading behavioral problem. So, and that's, like, what a horse is begging you to do. So if you let horses use to being transported to reduce their fear, they will then experience less behavioral problem and injuries. And that's his other main point. Like, often, the association between transport-related problem behavior and injuries is really high, not only for the horses, but also for the horse handler. So if you spend time to train the horses, you are reducing the incidence of injuries related to transport, not only in the horses, but also in the humans, on the handlers, so also for yourself. Do for yourself if you want to do for the horses. And if you want to read more, there are more papers published, and this is a nice review written by one of my students where we summarize all what is in the literature about transport-related problem behavior. Then, transport stress-related disease. So the most common problem after journey are disrupted feeding pattern, weight loss, dehydration, and fatigue, but also poor performance. I don't remember who said today, like, often the horses compete really well home, and then you move, and they don't repeat the same performance. clearly we transport them in between, and transport is all of these. So if you have a bad traveler, or you have make the journey bad for him, then it's normal that he's going to perform badly. It's kind of an equation. But there are even worse or more severe health problems related to transport. We have injuries, diarrhea, heat stroke, colic, enterocolitis, just inflammation of the airway, transport pneumonia, which is named shipping fever usually, but also laminitis and transit tetany. So all those diseases are associated with transport. And always when we've done this survey in Australia, we actually ask if people had experienced at least one health problem moving their horses. And yes, 67% of the respondents said yes. And in Australia, they reported lots of injuries related to transport. And again, we had similar incidents between amateur and professional for injuries, which is telling you basically that amateur actually have even more problems because they transport less horses. And these are actually real injuries happen during transport. They can happen due to the vehicle, because the vehicle, there are stuff inside the vehicle which might be dangerous, so they kick and they cut. So again, try to wrap your vehicle, pad your vehicle as much as you can, check the floor, because that's a real picture, the trailer. Basically, the floor of the trailer went down, and that is the leg of the horse. But we have also car accident involving trailer, and this is why, we have to consider that in this case, the reason of the majority of this car accident is vehicle failure. So, so please check your trailer before going. And I have a friend, Rebecca Jimenez, she does research on this topic, and she said that often people just forget the pin, the safety pin. So the majority of those accidents, again, it's our fault because we forget the safety pin. It's a safety pin. That's so important that the safety pin is in there. And what are the risk factors for traumatic injuries? So again, so when horses are moved by younger and less experienced people, there is 4 times the likelihood that the horses get an injury. And also, clearly, if you tend to move more horses, then clearly, it is likely that the horse reported injuries. This is why we now suggest insurance for covering transport-related injuries. And I know this is strange, but actually, the use of tranquilizers, so sedation, increases the risk of injury. I know that is a bit, it could open a debate, but, a transporter which I was doing research with, just a day told me, Barbara, please, beg all your colleagues to stop to sedate horses just because they are not able to load them, because at the first corner, all the horses go down. It is true, because the majority of the tranquilizer impair the ability of the horse to balance. And they really need to balance inside the trailer. So again, train your horses for loading and use less sedation. Other point is actually that protection increase basically the risk of injuries. And again, this could be another, I could open a debate on these results. Clearly, it could be that, my data a bit screwed because it was a questionnaire. So people who actually had past injury now tend to put more protection. But if you look at the literature, the problem is that we decide to wear everything on our horses just before the journey. And many of those horses are even not used to have all those protection. So those protection actually make them even more anxious, and then they start kicking and moving, and again, they move inside the trailer. So a journey has been basically, it's almost the same effort of a race. So would you actually put the same protection and let your horse gallop? So just think about all these protection. They can move, they can be they can annoy. Sorry, when I get tired, I cannot speak in English. They might annoy your horse, and again, remember the 5-degree more. They actually can make your horse even hotter, feeling hotter than before. So apply protection only if the horse is really used to it, and check the position of the protection while you are traveling. If they move it, then put it back in the right position. And again, that's clear that a float or a trailer increase the risk of injuries because they are less stable than big truck, so more vibration and so on. So we've done a study in New Zealand with Professor Riley at Mass University. So, and again, even in New Zealand, they reported almost 18% of injuries. The majority of the injury was shallow cut or bruise, but still 6 horses require euthanasia due to an injury which happened due to transport. And where are the regions where the horses get more injured? It's no surprise, it's clearly legs or head. So, and again, often these happen loading and unloading, and we can reduce this if we spend a bit of time in train our horses. In New Zealand, I was surprised by this data. The majority of the injury were not associated with or did not happen with loading, but with the middle of journey. And when I saw those data, I was in Italy, and so, why? That's strange, it's different. Then I went to New Zealand, and actually I saw that the road are so narrow, and you just go up and down the hill, up and down the hill, and there is a corner, and then I understood those data, the reason why. So minor road, too much vibration, injury inside the truck. And when we analyzed the New Zealand data, we found that be a professional increase the risk of transport-related injuries. And again, if you are really in this industry, think about an insurance. Also the breed, because clearly thoroughbred or thoroughbred cross, they are more reactive animals, so they actually tend to report more injuries. And all the horses which behavioral problems, they reported more injuries. Journey duration, and usually they tended to happen more at the beginning of the journey because it's when they moved more. Again, mechanical check, so please check the vehicle before moving your horses. And not surprising, the horse travel experience and the horse transport training were identified as a risk factor. To change topic, so heat stroke, we found that horses moved by amateur were more likely to suffer from heat stroke than those moved by professionals. And if you look at the literature, all comes to our handling skills. Often, a horse, it's much more quieter when it's handled by professional, and that's no surprising that they can even heat stroke if they are anxious and agitated. And then, again, the risk of heat stroke during journey is higher if the horse did not receive water and hay ad libitum before the journey. And again, that is common sense, because hay and water are really important, and they can create a reservoir in the gut of the horse, and they help to reduce dehydration, and dehydration is the major risk factor for heat stroke. Muscle problems. So we found that horses which were not checked before the journey, if they were fit for transport, they actually were 5 times more likely to develop muscle problem during journey. And this is a famous motto. So if you let a sick horse travel, you will end up with a sicker one. So transportation is going just to increase any minimal disease which is in your horse. So please check the fitness for transport. For laminitis, we found that horses which were not allowed to any recovery strategy were more likely to develop laminitis. So again, another suggestion, remember to give water, hay, electrolytes, and just let the horse stretch in a pasture with the head down for a bit, so you reduce the risk of laminitis. And then comes shipping fever, transport pneumonia. Thoroughbred and standardbred are more likely to develop it. They're probably just because they travel more and they travel over longer distance. But also because they tend also to live in larger horse stables, so where it's more likely there is also an exchange of virus, because often transport pneumonia starts after the virus has already, created some damage in the lung. And that's the number of horses. And journey duration is definitely a risk factor for transport pneumonia. When you move horses for more than 8 hours, then the risk of the pneumonia increases by 6 times. And what we can suggest, monitor temperature. The early diagnosis of transport pneumonia is really crucial if you want, save your horses and possibly its performance. So that's another good suggestion. If you can, as I said this morning, there are tools. You can monitor the temperature during the journey, but at least after journey, at least twice a day, but for at least 5 days, because often pneumonia show up later, 3-4 days after the long journey. And we were not able to find association between transport and colic, but then we've done another study, and actually we found that transportation in a fasting condition, this was 12-hour transport in a fasting condition, increased the risk of gastric squamous ulceration. And we were surprised that actually during the journey, the pH in the stomach increases. So actually becomes almost neutral. At the beginning, I thought my pH meter was broken because I had 7. So no, this must be wrong. But no, this is because the gut motility slows down in transport and you have bile reflux. So this brings to a common suggestion. Don't give kind of omeprazole before the journey, because actually instead of be protective, you actually increase the pH. So I know that I have written that transport may lead to stomach ulceration, but this doesn't mean give omeprazole before the journey. After, yes, but not before. And again, if you want to read more about these data, these are more research that we have published. As I said, journey duration is really a risk factor, and the most severe transport-related disease increase after 20 hours journey. And I know now with the AU we are considering to see, because at the moment, the maximum journey duration for horses is 24 hours. So we are considering if you actually decrease or change the way how they are transported, so that, like, you know, they might be transported for longer if inside the vehicle you have a better condition. And again, remember that transportation is also a risk factor for biosecurity. They exchange all the virus, all the bacteria. The truck goes from one place to another. And, you know, if you have an outbreak, then with the transport, they go all over Europe. And I see someone knocking. What I want to say is that transportation should always be conducted by experienced people and following best practice. And I try to give you a summary of all this chit-chat. So equine industry members need to be educated on equine transportation risk factor, best practices, policies, and I think an event like today, it's really what we really need. Policing of compliance of the equine movements with the handbook for the management of high health, high performance horses should be implemented. And with implemented, I'm considering that it should apply to all horses, not only to the top athlete, because the FEI and the OI, he put lots of effort in that book. So, like, you know, just let's use it. Horse movement should be planned and managed carefully to minimize transport stress, particularly when journeys are longer than 20 hours carried out during spring and transporting thoroughbreds. The use of sedation and other medication before transportation should be minimized and administered only by veterinarians. Horse should be trained for loading and traveling using habituation and self-loading training approaches. Horses should have access to hay and water ad libitum before traveling. Fitness for transport must be always correctly assessed. Before long journey, respiratory endoscopy should be conducted to avoid transporting animals with subclinical respiratory disease. Horses should be allowed to lower the head to floor level during transportation. Please avoid cross-tying. It's going to be banned soon, likely both in Australia and in Europe. So, but really, like, the movement of the neck are really crucial to minimize the transport pneumonia. Long fasting during transportation should be avoided. Arousing stimuli during transportation should be kept at minimum. Environmental parameters should be monitored during transport. Horse behavior on road should be monitored using cameras. Horse emotional stress level should be monitored by thermography, if you have the chance. Rectal temperature should be taken during the journey, if you have the chance. And again, after the journey, horses should be allowed to lower their head and to cool down, so just walking and stretching, as long as possible after transportation, and to rest for at least 24 hours following long journey. Health check should be carried out, as I said, at least rectal temperature, and in particular after long journey, in particular when you move top athlete by plane, there are some good data suggesting to assess serum amyloid A to actually identify horses at risk of pneumonia. And monitoring the hydration status by capillary filling time, while loss, and metabolic status by hemogas is recommended following transport to enable appropriate rehydration strategy to be implemented where required. I really stress the dehydration because 3% dehydration, it's hard to detect by impair your performance. So, like, you know, just monitor it before competing. And so thanks for listening, and that's what I really think. It comes from a study which I will not publish yet. So horses travel much better in a box, loosely, where they are free of movement and they can eat and drink on the floor. So thank you.